So, Jenny, I have to apologize to the audience first of all, because I'd like to be able to speak in Spanish, but I know you don't speak Spanish, and my Spanish is perfect. Hablo andaluz. So we're here to talk about language.
Yes. Let me explain the title. What's your language? When I was a small girl, he says, una niña pequeña. My mother used to say to me when I was using the wrong language, what's your language? So the discussion is because for 2 decades, 20 years, Anthony and I have had discussions about language in public health. So we're going to try and discuss some of those issues in a little bit more depth.
And the key term that is most problematic for Jenny and for others, not just Jenny, is the word assets. I've been working with the term assets for probably 10 years as a way of thinking about how we change the mindsets of people working in public health in all different parts of the system, policymakers, practitioners, researchers, to think about how we create health rather than how we actually just fix problems.
So when we've been talking about it for a long time, and I have been trying to think, am I just a pedant in Spanish? I don't know. Is it just that I focus too much on language, or is there something more? Because I think you and I share a value system. We share a value system. We work in public health. We know we work in public health because we want to make a difference, and we have a social justice framework. So it's an ideology. And I think the difference between us is that these words, first it was social capital. When we met, Anthony was very interested in social capital, and I was, whoa, no, not social capital.
But you were interested in social action.
Yes, yes. And then came assets. And Anthony, great. Jenny, whoa, no, not assets.
Because I'm a pragmatist.
So I think the difference between us is that for me, language is embedded in ideology. Right. And these words, so I have social determinants, building, strengthening communities, assets, Putnam, social capital, not Bourdieu, no Bourdieu, Putnam, social capital.
Bourdieu is good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Evidence, responsibility. I think these words, this is today, I think they are all embedded in an ideological framework that I would call economistic and public sector free. Yes? And most of them have come from America, from the US of America, not the South of America. So I think the problem is, for me, we share the same ideological frame. Mm-hmm. These words come from an ideological frame that is not our ideological frame. And words are not just words, you know. They're communicative objects, and they do action. You know, like my mother, what's your language? And Mariano, close the door, you know. So they tell you to act. And I think that's why you find people take the assets concept and they do things you wouldn't agree with. Mm-hmm. And they take the social capital concept and they do things because they don't share the ideological framework that you do.
Well, and I agree with that. But just to confirm, academics normally están gruñones, ¿entienden? They're grumpy. But you're not grumpy. No, that was a joke this morning. But actually, you do look at things and critique them. And I'm much more of a pragmatist. So I think we need language, whatever language we use, but we all need to understand that we're using the language for the same purpose. And I think maybe, listening to you yesterday and through my presentation and the discussion, that actually we need to refocus the language of assets to ensure that everybody understands and everybody has a similar ideology. I started using the terminology because I was interested in being positive about how we create health rather than how we minimize disease or reduce disease, about the need to actually make sure that people were connected to one another and that they were doing well for themselves but also for others, and actually thinking about how we most effectively involve local people in the health development process, because I believe that actually the more that you're involved, the more that you have control, whether that be individual control or collective control, you're more likely to be able to sustain health. And lastly, I believe in an evidence-based world. So I believe that we've got limited resources and we need to be able to demonstrate that we're doing the right thing. But what I agree with you is that actually we need to before we create that evidence base, we all need to agree on a language. So let's sort it out.
I think that's an aspiration which I would share. I just don't believe it's possible. Because I think, you know the quote you had this morning from Lynn Friedley. Lynn Friedley. She, for me, she is right. She is right. They're not. The problem is not capitalism, although that is the problem. But the problem is the economic framework, and the fact that there is an assumption in all of this language that is now central to health promotion that you do not need a universal platform. You do not need the public collective system. So people use these words in the way you want them to use the words, i.e. they take them up in a big way. They don't take power up in a big way, but they take social capital. They do that because it allows them to wriggle. You know, it allows them to find a space where they can do what they're going to do. So they will do behavior and lifestyle in the space of social capital and in the space of assets because the language allows them to do that. And I think if we make the values, the ideology more public, then it won't work in the way you would like it to work.
So what I talked about in my presentation was changing mindsets. So if you and I were in positions of big power, would you still have the same opinion? Or could we change the system? Is it the people in power that are not willing to change, or is it just too complex?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I'm not in a position of power is because I'm big mouth. So maybe you would be better able to negotiate. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that would be good. Yeah. Yes. See, I also think that working with local government, now I work a lot with local government, and I think the problem is the academics and the professional health promotion people. The politicians are more open, actually.
You think? Right, okay.
So the public health professionals in the UK talk about local government as an evidence-free zone. They say they don't ever use evidence. Yeah. But what they do is use knowledge. And some of that knowledge is professional codified knowledge, like evidence from research, but sometimes it's their own experiential knowledge, and sometimes it's knowledge from their local people. Yeah. But they use knowledge. They do use knowledge. They're not a knowledge-free zone.
And that's where we're introducing, again, it's another, assets is problematic. The notion of evidence is problematic because people don't understand it as the same thing. When I talk about evidence, I'm actually talking about knowledge, but why can't we call it evidence? Because I'm talking about ways of knowing the right thing to do in order to secure health and help people flourish. That's what I'm talking about. And that involves a mixed method approach, including tacit knowledge of individuals and people from the ground. So evidence is another bit of the language. It can be problematic. So it's not just assets. No,
it isn't. I have a list. I have a long list of problematic.
So how long do we have?
Yes. But I think these words, they're concepts. They're not just words. They're concepts, right? And they are part of a jigsaw, which is for at least 20 years been seeping in to the health field, largely from North America, and I think it is setting a framework which we know neoliberal. We're not supposed to use neoliberal anymore, but those processes that have been pushing back against collective provision against universalism. It's part of, we don't see it, but it is part of the same drive, because it's creating a frame where you don't need a universal platform, because you will have all these resilient communities strengthened by everything that we do, and you will have targeted services that just deal with the most marginalised, vulnerable people. Yeah, so I think the mindset is mostly amongst the academics and the public health professionals that politicians are more like you. They're more pragmatic, you know. But the advice they're getting all the time is, this is the best evidence. This is the best way to work. This is, community approaches are good, you know. So I think the problem is that level.
Is there other language that will be more helpful to fulfill our principles? So I think we're agreed that we actually have a set of principles which relate back to what you were saying yesterday about helping to people flourish, improving capability. But is there a language that would work, or is the system always going to be the problem?
I think the fact that language is a malleable thing, it's a political tool, yeah, that we all use, will always be an issue. So for me, maybe the thing is that we should be more explicit about our value system, our ideologies, and that will divide. It won't bring people together. It will divide people, because it's more comfortable when you're not explicit about your ideology. You know, so if the politics of language will always be an issue, there will be new concepts coming from different places. Then one of the things I think is to make our ideology in a positive way. You know, ideology is like another one of those watch your language. You get accused of being ideological. We're all ideological, you know. We're just sometimes more explicit, aren't we, about our ideology.
But if we had the right people in the right place at the right time in the system, maybe there's a tipping point where we can actually fulfill our principles and our ideologies that would actually help us move forward. Yeah. Otherwise, and this is why I think we need an evidence base for assets, because if we don't develop an evidence base, it will become the latest fashion that's gone out of fashion, and something else will replace it. And I don't think we you know, on part of the problem of inequalities is that sustainability of actually making prolonged action so that we can actually create better cohesive societies.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the thing about your work on assets that is really important is the salutogenesis. That's got lost.
Yeah,
you said that's got lost.
Yeah.
So for me, it kind of doesn't matter if the assets go, because that work has been done in different ways, as you said, not using that language.
Yeah.
But it would be much more important to try and bring back into the centre power and salutogenesis, to right into the centre of public health and health promotion, and hold on to those, and then be open about our ideological framework, about the means to get social justice and a salutonogenic approach. And at this time, maybe assets are all right for some people, so long as we're clear what the ideological framework is within which we're using those.
One of the reasons why I like salutogenesis is it operates at both levels. It operates at an individual level and a community level. And if the system is not working for us, I think we need to strengthen individual capacity and capability to work around the system, or to use the system for their own benefit. Now, that's not ideally what we want to do in terms of the common good. But I'll give you an example. I've got a friend who goes to his GP surgery and he says, I haven't got any symptoms at the moment, but I'm sure I will next week, because he has the capacity to think about managing his own health. When I go to the doctors, even though I've got a lot of health knowledge, the power relationship is very much sided on the GP, because I go into this mode of I should be listening and not actually engaging in a conversation. So giving individuals the capacity, competence, capability to engage with the system or work around the system when it's not working, I think is useful. It's not an ideal situation for me, because I think the idea of collective good and collective working is the best scenario.
I think collective working is a I think it's a false distinction, isn't it, between the collective and the individual. So you can't have, for example, a community taking collective control over their destiny unless there is enough individuals that have that sense also that they as individuals have got control. So
I agree.
So it's
yeah.
you know, so that's that notion of power within. It has to be within the person as well as within the collective.
I think that connects to me. I think you've been talking about the idea of place, because a lot of the ideas around community developments or asset-based community developments is about place, it's about geography. Well, it is about that, but it's all about other things. It's about that connectedness in and out of communities, in all sorts of communities.
Across groups, really.
But it's difficult to simplify that into
Yeah,
an easy message.
It is. It's not an easy message, but I agree with you that if you're in a political system where social justice and the acknowledgement of unequal power and the right to health, so the salutinogenic approach, is politically acceptable.
Yeah.
So at a national level, which means the population have voted for this government in a reasonably open system, then it will be easier to do any of these things in a way that fits with that ideological framework. But in the UK at the moment, it's very difficult, I think, because the macro political framework is antagonistic towards universal provision, towards public resources. It's cutting that, we know it's cutting that dramatically. And so there is, for me, much more concern about how these concepts, asset-based community development, social capital, community approaches, they're all driving that agenda. And I think it is in communities of interest and place that are already having a heavy burden of coping with this shrinking of the state, shrinking of the state.
So in terms of language then, what do you think we, you and I, our colleagues in Spain, in other parts of the world, can do to move it on, despite your reservations about being able to fix the system?
Well, the two things I always do, and now I know I do it, explicitly know I do it, I obviously have been doing it, is that I test the words, the concepts, against my ideological frame. I'm a feminist socialist. I am. That is what I am. And I have a very clear view about what my academic persona is and what my personal persona is. They're totally mixed. I'm not grumpy. I'm angry. Is there an angry dwarf?
No, not grumpy. It is grumpy, I think. We'll just have to classify you as that for now.
Grumpy,
so
angry. Yeah. Angry, grumpy. Yeah.
You're an agitator.
We'll need another dwarf.
Yeah, the agitator.
The 8 dwarfs. So
but you're not. You're all those things, but you're open to criticism and you're open to a change your ideas. I think there's a difference there. You're not so wedded to one particular concept. But I think it's linking the ideology with a concept and not just using the concept for the concept's sake.
So what I do, like you, I am pragmatic. There is a pragmatism in here.
A grumpy pragmatist.
An angry
Oh, angry, sorry, yeah.
So interestingly, when we first worked together, we worked on social capital. So I said, that's a great idea, Anthony, can we do this? Which was not talk about social capital, we talked about social action.
Yeah.
And that was fine. Yeah, good, yeah. And then instead of calling our community activists, community champions or whatever, we call them social agitators. Again, you said, okay, I think I can swing that. Yeah, no. It was about experimenting, wasn't it? With, so, but if you hadn't have had an ideological frame, the kind you had, you wouldn't have allowed that to happen, right? So resilience is the latest buzzword.
It is.
Yeah. So I have done the same. I've taken resilience, and we have a program in the Northwest which I haven't told you about yet, not a lot, and it's a neighbourhood resilience program which WHO are interested because they like the word resilience.
Yeah.
What it is a systems approach to resilience. So can we make these systems, the public sector, the private sector, the third sector, and the people who live here, more resilient collectively as a system? So I do the same as you. I take the word and I think I'm going to subvert this word, this concept. And so to answer your first question, the other thing I test it against my own political ideology. But the other thing I do, Amartya Sen says, and you have too many men influencing you.
I put you up there.
I know.
Didn't forget you.
As an influence. So I think he's a very interesting thinker, isn't he, Amartya Sen, which is where the capabilities approach comes from. And I think I like him because he also has an ideology that fits, although he is an economist, of course. But he says that you should only, when you get a new concept, he's written a piece for the Asian Development Bank, which is really interesting. It's on social capital. And it was written in 98, I think. He says in there that what he does when a new concept comes into his field, which is poverty, is he tests it for the investigative advantage it gives him. Mm-hmm. If it gives him more investigative advantage than the concepts he's working with, then he will use it. He will use it. But he does that test first, and the paper with the Asian Development Bank is testing it against.
It's a bit like health impact assessment. It's concept impact assessment.
Concept impact, absolutely, yes. Yeah. So I think
creating new language.
Yeah. So maybe those are the two things that would make me a bit more comfortable. We're more explicit about our framework, our ideological and value framework within which we're working. Yeah. So the macro framework within which we're working. And then when we get a new concept, particularly if it comes from North America, maybe not, but that we test it for, does this give us investigative advantage over the concepts that we already have? And if it does, then okay, let's fit it into the jigsaw.
So I think probably we agree. I don't think we disagree. But actually, I suppose finally is, should we, just to confirm, should we throw assets out and think about something else? Or should we do what you said is about accompanying assets with an explicit set of principles or ideology that at least let people know why we're using this term?
So these two, social capital and assets, I have a particular problem with it, because I think that what they are doing is both of them talking about the economic notion of stocks and flows. So they're things to be used up, assets.
So you're saying that we should throw them out?
I'm very uncomfortable with them. But nobody's going to throw them out. So I think...
Well, they'll become...
They will eventually become less popular.
But again,
absolutely. Something else
we need to start doing concept impact assessment now so that we can bring in the new term.
So maybe what we need to do with those two, well, capital's gone already, hasn't it?
Well, it's coming back in some countries, yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Maybe what we need to do is do what Amartya Sen says, which is there's other things here like the community action rather than community development, you know. The notion of releasing capacity rather than building it and strengthening it, that focuses you on the barriers. So we do an audit and we think, okay, what's the new thing that assets brings in this already crowded conceptual field? Yeah. And then if we're clear about that, we can say, oh, this is the investigative advantage this concept brings us.
So you're still really basso vacío.
Am I?
So medio vacío. See? Glass half empty.
Oh, am I?
I don't know.
I am glass...
I think you're glass half full, to be honest.
I'm glass half full about the potential of social movements that are focused on justice to make a difference, eventually. And I'm very half full about the young people, particularly the ones we have met in Granada recently. I think they're powerful young people. But I'm half empty about people like you and me not making very much difference. And the politics of this time are really, really, really tough, I think. Really tough.
But so I assume that you've got somebody in your back pocket that can continue your work with that energy to change the system, because where you started from, in terms of agitation, you wanted to change the system, so you believe the system could change, but you seem less doubtful now.
Well,
or more doubtful.
More doubtful. The last 10 or 15 years have been, I mean, you know, we're from a generation, we grew up in the welfare system.
Am I as old as you?
No. Right. Sorry. We are two generations.
Just to clarify.
No. That's true. That's true, but women live longer than men.
Oh yeah, that's true as well.
So we're from two generations. We benefited from welfare systems after the war, and a sense after the Second World War, and a sense of cohesion and the need to be more equal, the need to be fairer and juster, and that has been dismantled. You know, in many of our countries that's been dismantled, and I think what I'm doing is suffering from a shock that we could lose that. I didn't believe we could lose that, and now in the UK, of course, as we know, we're losing the National Health Service. It is being privatised, and I never believed that would happen. I just my half empty is a real shock that we became complacent about what we had achieved, and which I think is why I react so badly to these words, because it's like we're not thinking enough about what we're doing and whether this is helping us to do that, really.
So
I'm half full sometimes, half empty sometimes.
In the meantime, vamos a Chiclana,
yes.
a la playa, para tomar un poco de sol. To be continued.